distinguished guests for coming. We have a great pleasure and opportunity for this assembly today to participate in a presentation by Chris Cassidy, an astronaut and a Navy SEAL from York, Maine. Mr. Cassidy recently spent 166 days in space on his second space mission. He covered 75 million miles and made 3 spacewalks. He's just been back to Earth for 6 weeks. Astronaut Cassidy visited his alma mater, York High School, on Monday to talk to students about his adventures and the importance of science and mathematics. He came just from yesterday from Bangor, and he is here today at Fort Kent. These are the only 3 stops he's making for quite a while. We are very fortunate to have Astronaut Cassidy here due to the hard work by Mr. Doak, our superintendent, also by Bill Green, WLBZ, Channel 2 in Bangor, Jim Thibodeau, founder of Thibodeau Insurance, Steve Pelletier, owner of Valley Motors and Pelletier Ford, who has been flying Astronaut Cassidy here and back. Thank you all for all of your help in making this presentation possible. As you can see, we have a whole lot of people in this gym auditorium today. Over 1,000 people by our estimation. We are having students and faculty visiting from Madawaska Middle High School, Wisdom Middle High School, the Magnet School, MSSM, and of course our students from 6th through 12 for Valley Rivers Middle School and Community High School. Yeah. Woo! Give you all an experience that most people do not have. Most people in their lives have not had the experience of being able to listen to and talk to a person, an astronaut that's been in space twice in their whole entire lives. So while you're listening, please pay attention, and I believe we're going to have a question and answer time. Just a little bio for our distinguished guest. He was originally from Salem, Mass, but now resides in York, Maine with his wife, Julie, and 3 of his children. He went to York High School, went to the Navy Academy Prep School, got a BS in mathematics from the U.S. Naval Academy, has an MS, master's degree in ocean engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, graduated with honors from basic underwater demolition SEALs. We know as Buzz. Has been in the U.S. Navy SEAL teams for 10 years, received a Bronze Star with Combat V and Presidential Unit Citation, and he went selected for NASA in 2004, completed his training in 2006, and has been on 2 space missions. And without further ado, Astronaut Cassidy.
Thank you very much. Do I need that, or can you all hear me? Can you guys hear me? Or should I use this? Can you hear me out there? No? Here, I'll just use that. Hi, can you hear me now? All right, great. Thanks so much for the warm welcome. It's so cool to be here in Fort Kent. It's my first time ever in Fort Kent, and I'm just so excited to be here. And I imagine that you guys are excited because, one, you're not in class right now, and I understand also that you just had testing yesterday, so you got that behind you, and now here we are about to talk about space stuff. Really, really cool things that I've had the opportunity to do, and it's exciting for me to share it with all of you, my fellow Maine folks here. I grew up, like she said, in York, Maine. York, Maine's my hometown. I went through school there, graduated from high school. I was just another guy just in school like you all, trying to figure out what I was going to do after high school. What was I going to do tomorrow? Studying for tests, playing sports was my favorite thing. I enjoyed football, but basketball was my favorite sport, and it always gives me chills to be in a high school basketball gymnasium right now. I want to take a three-pointer actually here right now. But didn't ever expect that I would be an astronaut. Didn't even expect that I would be in the SEAL teams. I was looking through college brochures, and I found information about the Naval Academy, and it's a free place to go. And so I applied and got accepted. I found myself in Annapolis, Maryland for 4 years. And during that time, I met a few guys who were in the SEAL teams, and they were real sharp, motivating guys. And I wanted to be just like them, and I thought the SEAL team program was pretty challenging, and I was curious if I could do it myself. So I signed up for that, spent 10 awesome years traveling around the world with my SEAL platoon, lived in San Diego, California, and Norfolk, Virginia, which was the two areas where we have SEALs based out of in the US, and just had a wonderful time. But during that time, I met another guy who was a SEAL named Bill Shepard, who had become an astronaut, and he was the one that motivated me to look into applying to become an astronaut. And I realized it's just a bunch of papers you can fill out, make the application, send it on in, and hope for the best, and that's what I did. Made it through the application process, which was a whole lot of medical screening. You guys have seen the movie The Right Stuff. It's an older movie. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but in there they have the, oh, now you can really hear me, like from 3 different ways. I guess it's coming through this microphone now, so we probably don't need the handheld. So lots of medical screening. I made it through all of that and found myself being told I was going to be an astronaut in 2004, about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And I moved to Houston, Texas. That's actually where I live now, is in Houston, Texas with my family. And the first 2 years that you're an astronaut, you guys are going to love this, you're called an astronaut candidate, but everything we do at NASA has an acronym. So the abbreviation for astronaut candidate is ASCAN. You're an ASCAN. And nobody wants to be an ASCAN, right? That doesn't sound like a cool thing. You'd rather be an astronaut. So you study hard for 2 years, and it's a lot of time in classrooms, and then we take what we learn in the classroom and apply it in a simulator, very much like how you guys maybe have a lab where you learn some theory and then you go into the lab and see the true application of that theory. So that was kind of the 2 years as I was preparing to be a fully qualified astronaut. Completed that, and then was told I was going to be on a space shuttle mission. The space shuttle, you guys, I don't know, you may or may not know, but the space shuttle has been retired. We no longer fly the space shuttle. All 3 of them are at museums around the country. And I was lucky enough to fly on Space Shuttle Endeavour with my 7 crewmates. And in the summer of 2009, we blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We went to the International Space Station. We were there for 2 weeks and did some construction, added a new part to the space station, and brought some supplies with us, and then took some used up components and brought them back home. After that, I was wondering what the opportunities for space flights were going to be for me, and I was told to get ready to prepare for 6 months in space, and I was going to train to launch it from Russia in a Soyuz, which is a tiny little vehicle. Now, the space shuttle, you can think of the space shuttle like a king cab pickup truck. You got 2 rows, an upstairs and a downstairs the shuttle has in the front. And it's really kind of small but comfortable. And in the back of a pickup truck, you can put a whole bunch of cargo. But if you're driving down the road, you can't really access that cargo, right? You got to stop, pull over, get out, and get to the cargo. Same exact analogy is true with the space shuttle. We have a ton of cargo in the cargo bay, but you can't really access it unless you use a robotic crane, robotic arm we call it, or if you put a spacesuit on, go outside and do a spacewalk, you can get to the cargo that way. The Russian Soyuz is this tiny, tiny, tiny little spacecraft. If you take 3 of these chairs that are here, right in this part of the gym and squish them together so the metal legs are touching, that's about how wide the Soyuz is. And the panel is right in front of your face, and the wall was right on touching my right shoulder, and Sasha Masurkin, my cosmonaut crewmate, the wall was touching his left shoulder. So we're really squished in there, to give you an idea of the size difference between the space shuttle and the Soyuz. So anyways, we came together, the three of us, as a three-person crew. We were going to the space station, preparing to fly. Now, it's a Russian vehicle. That means all of the switches, all of the inside, the labeling, everything about that spaceship is written in Russian. All of the books that we use to follow the procedures were written in Russian. And I didn't speak Russian, so that was the very first thing I had to do was take Russian language class. And it's hard to learn language when you're an older guy. I was a 40-year-old guy when I'm starting this whole process, and it was really, really difficult to pick up the language. I can kind of speak now, but I was wishing that I had at least taken language more seriously when I was a younger guy. And I imagine that French is probably a pretty popular language around here. If you have grandparents or parents that speak it, I would encourage you to continue to foster that, because it helps you out later in life. I certainly wish that was the case with me. So language training, but it's an international space station, which means that there's international training. We go to Russia and spend half our time there, a little bit of time in Japan, a little bit of time in Germany, and a lot of time in Houston as we prepared to get to the space station. Now, that whole process was a couple years, and then just at the end of your last school year, in March, I left Houston, went off to Russia to prepare for our liftoff, and we lifted off from the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan, in the end of March, and I just returned back in September, so I was up there for just shy of 6 months. I have about a 20-minute video that talks about that time that I was in space, and we'll show that, and then after the video I'll be happy to take all your questions. So whoever is playing the video, if we could get that going. So, like I mentioned, the bulk of the training takes place in Russia, near Moscow. We don't need the audio. You can mute the audio. It takes place near Moscow, and we're there for some exams and some ceremonial things and whatnot. But then 2 weeks before launch, we get on this airplane and we fly down to Kazakhstan, which is basically like flying from Maine to Florida, about a 3-4 hour flight. And Pavel and Sasha and I were in what we call quarantine period, which is a time when they sort of isolate us from everybody else, and in an effort to minimize the risk of bringing sickness or germs or viruses up to the space station. We also have the opportunity to go to the manufacturing building where they assemble our Soyuz spacecraft, and we get to sit inside and see how it's laid out, put our books and our equipment, lay it all in there, and have it be just the way we want it, so it's ready to go on launch day. Our families, who we had said goodbye to 3 or 4 weeks before, now they arrived down in Baikonur. This is called the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And I should mention that the very first human being to go to space was not an American. It was a Russian guy named Yuri Gagarin. And good old Yuri, he launched from the same exact facilities that we were doing all these things right here. This door that we're signing is the room that Yuri spent the night before his launch, and we still do the same thing today. It's kind of interesting. A lot of history, a lot of traditions happen there. So our families arrive. We get to see our families for a couple days, a few visits during those last couple days before launch, and then it's time to say goodbye and go. The morning before liftoff, our rocket rolls out on this big train out to the launch pad, and in 30-45 minutes, it's really amazing, it goes from on the rail car to a straight up position like that. That was not sped up, that was actual real time. It's pretty fast. And then later that night, we put on our suits and walk out to our rocket. It's 2 in the morning, so it was the middle of the night. And can you imagine if you guys took your testing yesterday at 2 in the morning? You wouldn't have done so well, right? So the same thing is true with us. We have to adjust our sleep so that 2 in the morning feels like a reasonable time. And that's what we did. We get on this bus and drive out to the launch pad. Now, the launch pad is about a 20-minute drive away from really all the rest of the buildings and civilization, because it makes sense. You don't want to have a big explosion nearby where people are. And so it's a long drive out there in the middle. Well, back in the early 1960s when Yuri launched, he had to go to the bathroom on the way to the launch pad. So he asked the bus driver to stop, pull over so he could pee. Well, they're very customs and traditions oriented, so we had to stop, pull over, and pee in the very same bush that Yuri did. Just before this period here, where we get to the rocket, get in this elevator, just the 3 of us, all squished in, shoulder to shoulder in this rickety little elevator, and we ride up to the top, and one by one climb in. And remember how I told you how small the cockpit is. So my buddy Sasha gets in first, then I got in second, kind of slid off to my side. Then Pavel, our commander, he then got in the middle and closed the hatch. On the space shuttle, it's big enough where people can help you do all that. The Soyuz is too small, you can't. We're in there for 2.5 hours before liftoff, and the clock ticks down, and finally, boom, the rocket's light. And you would think that it's a really, really big push, and your head slams back as you lift off the launch pad, but it's not the case. The engine's light, and it's really heavy, but as the fuel burns away, the same amount of thrust and force starts pushing the rocket, and you then slowly build up the accelerations as you get up to space. That portion where the rockets are lit is only 9 minutes long. And during those 9 minutes, there's 3 different rocket engines that light. It's called stages, first, second, and third stage. And in between, when the first rocket motor stops, you kind of feel the slow down, and then the second engine fires, and you accelerate again, and the same thing happens between the second and third stage. And then the engine cuts off, and you're floating in 0 gravity. Now, in reality, this capsule is so small, there's not much room to float. So we'll unstrap and stretch out our legs a little bit, and 6 hours later, we're rendezvousing to the space station. So it's pretty fast. We do have another section that we can access to have a little bit more room to take off our spacesuit and be ready to approach to the space station. Now, it's really hard to imagine what it means to rendezvous 2 space vehicles. When you're orbiting the Earth, you're going 17,500 miles an hour, or 5 miles a second. That is so fast, it's hard for even us to comprehend how fast that is. But you can see that both of those spaceships are going that fast, and the catching up one, this guy right here, our Soyuz, is going just a little bit faster to close that distance, and we bring it in a nice controlled way and dock the 2 vehicles. There's a probe that goes in that grabs on, and it sucks the 2 vehicles together, and then some hooks reach out and make it really secure, so there's a nice airtight seal between the 2, and then we can open the hatches and transfer in. We have to do about an hour or so of leak checks to make sure that there's absolutely no leak, and then we can pass our way through. I had a Canadian crewmate named Chris Hadfield, and Chris has a really big bushy black mustache, and I had gotten my hands on a fake mustache that his family members had when he launched, and I kept it in my spacesuit. And then right here you can see I put it on to greet him, just to give him a good chuckle, and he certainly got a laugh out of this shot right there. So now you're in the space station, and the interesting thing is, all of your clothing, all your personal stuff has to go to the space station months before you ever get there. So the first day you arrive, you really don't know anywhere your stuff is. So you spend the first couple hours going all over the space station, finding your socks and your shorts and your underwear and your gym clothes, gym sneakers, and all that kind of thing. And while you're doing that, it's a good way to practice how to move around the space station. It's not very intuitive on how much force you need, and you can see right here, we just push off really slowly. right here I'm kind of moving faster and zipping up into the upstairs portion, but you can see it doesn't take much effort. And if you push too hard, if you go too fast, you're either going to crash into the opposite wall or you're going to crash into your buddy as he's coming around a corner just like that. But it's really fun to move around in space. If you could push off in your seats right now and just float up to the ceiling and then push off the ceiling and float back to your chair, it's pretty cool, and it's the same feeling sensation for us. Just because we're astronauts doesn't mean that we think differently than you guys. So we get just as much of a kick out of doing that as anybody. We do a lot of experiments up there. This particular one is with a robot, a virtual reality robot. We can put these gloves on, move our hands around, and the robot responds in the same way. And what he sees through his eyes, we see through those goggles there. These little soccer ball size satellites are pretty cool. They zip all around the space station, making a map and photographing everything, all the equipment and everything that's in the space station, so that the people on the ground know exactly where everything is located. And those are really cool. I like this picture right here because that's the urine processor. And what does the urine processor do? It turns today's urine into tomorrow's water. And that sounds disgusting, but it actually is pretty good water. And we reclaim 95% of the water that we use. Our sweaty t-shirts, our urine, the condensate that we breathe out and goes into the air, all of that returns into the air conditioning system and gets reprocessed for drinking water. So it's a pretty efficient system. I know everybody always is grossed out about that. This place right here is called the cupola. And it's in the floor of one of the areas of the space station. It looks right down at the planet. And you can see what a cool view that is. And here is a transition between dark and daylight. Here comes, that's the horizon, that's the view we see. That's Florida right there. This is the Persian Gulf here. So just really fantastic, fantastic views. The Nile River Delta, really awesome to look out at the planet. My Italian crewmate, Luca Parmitano, he's a bald guy, and I kind of am a joker, so I thought it would be fun to shave my head and be like Luca. I almost stopped at the mohawk, but I thought Mission Control would be mad at me, so I had to keep on going and shave it off. You can see the hair floats away. You need a vacuum cleaner to hooked up to the hair clippers to keep it all. Otherwise, it ends up in the air conditioning. So here's the real Luca and his long-lost twin brother, me, as I greeted them. So there's 6 people on the space station. 3 were already there when our crew arrived, me, Pavel, and Sasha. And those 3 guys, Harris Hatfield, Tom Marshburn, and a Russian fella, they left halfway through our stay, and then Luca, Karen, and a Russian guy arrived. So that's how we do the rotation. There's always 6 people up there. With exception to this week, actually, it's a really weird week because a crew just launched the other night with a Olympic torch that is going on a spacewalk tomorrow and then returning on Monday. So that's the only time we've ever had 9 people up there, 3 different Soyuzes. But I had the opportunity to do a couple spacewalks. And spacewalks are just so cool. They're my favorite thing to do up there. And one day we woke up and there was a noticed leak on the outside of the space station. We woke up and they said, tomorrow you're going out to do a spacewalk, which is unheard of. They're usually planned months in advance. So my buddy Tom and I put our spacesuits on and went out and had to change out a pump that had a leak and put in a new pump. And fortunately that fixed the problem. These leashes right here are much like a dog leash, and we hook that to ourselves in the spacesuit, and the other end is hooked to the airlock. And if you let go, imagine this is your view in the spacesuit. If you let go, that tether will reel you back to safety near the airlock hatch. If that fails, which it never has, we have a small little jetpack that can zip us back to the space station as well. But the first rule is don't let go. 2 other spacewalks I did were planned ones, and one of those 2 went just by the plan, nothing special to say about it. But the third one was really interesting. We had the spacesuit is like a heavy Gore-Tex jacket. It's loose and floppy and real thick, and if you puff it up, it gets stiff and rigid to 4 pounds of pressure, and it's a hard suit. Well, if you work out hard inside a suit like that, you're going to get really hot. So we need cooling to keep us cool, and the water inside Luca's cooling system was leaking into his air that he breathed, and that was getting into his helmet and filling up his helmet with water. And so Luca noticed it about 45 minutes into our spacewalk, and the two of us kind of looked at each other, and I remember looking into his helmet and seeing water blobs all around his head as it came over his eyes and his ears and got to his nose. And fortunately, this is the two of us looking at each other. You can't see it probably too well from where you are, but there's a ball of water all on his visor right there. And fortunately, we made it back to the airlock, closed the hatch, and opened the air pressure valves to equalize the pressure with the safety of the inside of the space station, and we were able to get his helmet off in time before it was really bad. But it was not a comfortable situation for Luca, and one of the scariest moments I've had while I've been in space. And here you are. Here you can see we get back inside, and all the rest of our crewmates were there to help get Luca's helmet off and make it safe for him. But spacewalks, regardless of that, spacewalks are really, really rewarding. It's hard work. You're out there doing real tasks, but really one of my favorite things to do. So we do a bunch of experiments. We do some spacewalks every now and then. We repair broken things, but also we have to do a lot of supply and moving equipment. So this is a Japanese cargo ship. There's also a European cargo ship that we saw. We saw 2 Russian cargo ships in our 6 months there, and the United States has several cargo ships as well, but they didn't happen to arrive while I was up there. And when these cargo ships come, imagine a moving truck shows up to your house full of stuff, and your house is full of stuff, and you have to transfer, put the truck stuff into the house and the house stuff into the truck, and you can't put anything in the yard. That's kind of what it's like with these vehicles. It's a mess. There's bags everywhere. You can really easily put trash into the new bags and put new bags into the trash, so you have to be real meticulous about what goes where. What do they bring? It brings food, new experiment things, equipment, fresh fruit. You'll see here in the video in a little bit, fresh fruit and vegetables come. Spare parts, new equipment, just a lot of things. But all the urine we already talked about. Once a week, so we have a stockpile of used metal buckets that need to be thrown away, and those go in these cargo vehicles as well. Speaking of food, here's Luca making some strawberry shortcake, which is actually really, really tasty. I love the food up there, by the way. I gained weight from all the eating that I did because there's so much selection of food, and it's really tasty. Easy to eat the food, easy to add water. It was too easy, actually. So these vehicles stay with us for about a month, and then we send them on their way, and you can see right here, that's an image of that thing burning up in the atmosphere as it went back to its fiery death. Exercise, huge, huge part of our health, and it's not so much for our muscles. Everybody often thinks that we want to keep our muscles fit, but that's okay. But the true reason is for our bone health. If you don't do anything while you're in space, your bones realize, hey, I don't have to work, and they get real thin, much like a person with osteoporosis. So the #1 way we can do that is to lift weights and exercise. This is the glove box. There was a fire experiment, it was earlier in the video. This is the glove box where that fire experiment happened. So 5.5 months went by in a heartbeat for me, and it was time to head home. And this is the 3 of us saying goodbye to our other 3 crewmates on just 6 or 7 weeks ago. It's hard for me to believe it. It seems like a lot longer. Anyways, we get in, we close this hatch. All that happens pretty soon before landing, 5 or 6 hours before landing. We have some more leak checks to do to make sure everything is good. We turn on all our computers, make sure that everything's healthy. And then we separate from the space station and orbit the Earth one time, and then do a maneuver called the deorbit burn, which slows us down just enough so that we are no longer in a safe orbit, and we start entering in through the atmosphere. And here's what it looks like coming through the atmosphere. All of the heat and fire and smoke from launch has to do the same thing coming back out, and it comes out in the form of heat into the bottom of our spaceship, into the heat shield, and that heat billows up around the windows, and that window is right by my right-hand shoulder. And the window, you can see, gets all completely charred up. If you put your hand on the wall, you can feel how hot it is. It's a noticeable temperature difference. And it's a bumpy ride as you're bumping your way through the atmosphere. Then all of a sudden you make it out. There's another little explosion that happens, and the heat shield gets jettisoned. And then another explosion happens as the parachute gets deployed. And initially it's not symmetric like that, hanging down. It's only got one parachute riser, and so you're whipping around until the parachute settles out, and then you get nice and symmetric. Right before you land, there's some soft landing rockets that fire and slow you down a little bit, but it's still a pretty good thud as we hit the ground. And it's kind of an egg-shaped bottom, so it doesn't just sit right on the floor, it rolls over. So you never know if you're going to be the high guy or the low guy. I happen to be up on the high side, and looked down and looked across at my buddy Sasha, and we're giving each other high fives. And there was his window, I could then see through and see the grass, and that's when I knew we were stopped, we made it, we were back on Earth. Really soon after, the helicopters were there, they got us out of the spacecraft, take us to a medical tent. I had to do some really basic medical exams for about a half an hour, and then right onto a helicopter that flew us to a nearby NASA plane, and that NASA plane flew me all the way back to Houston, but we did stop in Bangor to refuel and to go through customs. You guys are familiar with customs being so close to the Canadian border, and we had to do the same exact thing right there in Bangor. That was just 6 weeks ago. I made it to Houston, and now here I am sharing my story, and it's exciting for me to talk about this because I thought it was so cool, and I'm really happy to take your questions right now. So fire away. Yeah.
Whenever you got back from space, was it weird to walk?
When I go back, what?
Like whenever you came back from space, was it weird to walk?
He asked, was it weird to walk whenever I came back to space? And yes, the first half hour or so, I really couldn't walk very well at all. I would immediately fall over. I was strong enough to walk, but all of the muscles and the balance thing that make it a coordinated thing, it wasn't working for me. And it was probably a solid week before I could stand on one foot without falling over. When I landed in Bangor, I could walk by myself, no problem, but I got really tired and I needed to sit after 5 or 10 minutes. And I was fully recovered, I think, probably in 3 weeks or so from landing. Yeah, sir.
What's your first Canadian astronaut, the man who made the space odyssey?
I can't hear too well. One more time.
What's your first Canadian astronaut, the person who made the space odyssey video?
I'm sorry. What was it?
What's your fellow Canadian astronaut, the Chris
Hadfield?
Hadfield, the man who made the space odyssey?
Yeah. So your brother or sister put me up to making you say that question 3 times, so sorry about that. No, absolutely. He's asking about Chris Hadfield, and he was my crewmate, and sure enough, he made the Space Odyssey video right before he came home, and I helped him with a little bit of the video, so it was pretty cool to see that, how popular that video got. Right there with the red.
Is it hot or cold in space?
Interesting question. So in space, if you're in the sun, it's about 250 degrees, and if you're in the shade, it's about minus 200 degrees. So if you, in your spacesuit, if you're standing with the shadow right here at your waist, half your body, you could bake cookies on it, and the other half of the body is really, really cold. So the spacesuit has a pretty challenging job to do to keep your body at the right temperature, and that's why we have this cooling system that can make you cooler or hotter and really help manage the temperature inside your suit. Yeah?
You have the shield.
Do we have a heat shield? Yeah, so on the bottom of the Soyuz, we use the heat shield to help us when we come back into the atmosphere, that like the video showed. But then it falls away after its job is completed.
Like an actual shield, like from movies.
Well, it's a piece of material. It's not like a button, like a force field or anything, like a movie or anything. It's a piece of material.
I have another question.
Hold on, let's get somebody else up. Yeah.
You paint space.
Can you what? Paint? Yeah. In fact, we have a small little supply of art stuff because some previous astronaut, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to paint the Earth in their free time. And so there's some paint and some pencils and a pad of drawing paper up there. How do you keep the paint from floating away, he's asking. It's, you just put a little bit on the brush, and it's in like a cup, and the surface tension of the paint just keeps it in the cup, and then you can just kind of paint on there. Yeah, it's a good question. It's the same way as food. If you open up your food, it stays on the spoon just from the surface tension of the liquid. Yeah.
Which do you like better, space or Earth?
What do I like better, space or Earth? That's a good question. I think I like visiting space and coming back to Earth. It's nice to be home. It's nice to have gravity. It's nice to come to Maine. It's nice to see the seacoast and smell fresh cut grass. And none of that you can do while you're in space. But it's really, really cool to be in space. Yeah. What? She's asking about water floating around, and when you squirt water in space, it just floats around in big balls of different sizes, and you can actually make the balls join together, and you can get the biggest one I ever had that I was ever able to make before it kind of hit the wall was not quite a softball, but a little bit, not quite a soccer ball, but a little bigger than a softball, and then you can just drink it. Yeah. A little bit louder.
Did you see any other planets like Mars?
He's asking, could we see any other planets when we're up there? And you know what? The short answer is yes, but we are only, our altitude is about 250 miles above the surface of the Earth, which is not that much closer to the planet than we are here, right here in Fort Kent. So the planets look the same size. The moon looks the same exact size. The stars look the same exact size. But they're just crisper because you're not looking through the atmosphere as you look to see them. Yeah. How do you sleep in space, she's asking. We take the sleeping bag and we tie it to the wall and then climb in it. And there's little holes for your arms to stick out. And you either put your arms inside the sleeping bag or outside, and they kind of float around. I preferred mine to be inside the sleeping bag. And then you have to tell yourself, I had to tell myself that the wall wasn't the wall, and just pretended that I was actually on the floor, and then it made more sense to sleep that way. It's kind of, you trick your brain. What do we do to study? What do we study while we're up there? So what do we study while we're in space? Well, most of the studying that we do is prior to the mission to prepare for what we have to do. But while we're in space, I guess to answer your question, we often have to do procedures that are complicated. Often the procedures we do are things we do very often, once a week, maintenance and things, and so we don't have to study those procedures. But for big events coming up that day, the next week, we would review the procedure ahead of time so we knew what to do. So that's probably what I would say I studied most, was just preparing for the work that was, the complicated work that was in my near-term horizon. Yes, young lady. Did we go on the moon? Unfortunately not. The last moon person was in 1972, I think. And we haven't been back there since, but we hope to. Maybe when you're an astronaut, we'll go back to space. Yeah.
Have you ever dropped anything out of the space shuttle? Have
we ever dropped anything out of the space shuttle? And So during a spacewalk, what we do, it briefly showed it in the video, but we have a tether is hooked to every single thing. And so you're using the cordless drill or you're using a pair of pliers, it always has a tether back to you. And so if you let go, it stays hooked to you. So I've never let go of anything and lost it. It's always been tethered, thank goodness. Over there. What were my biggest fears while living in space? I think probably, to be perfectly honest, just coming back into the atmosphere, that's a really challenging time. And getting up to space is exciting, but you're there already, and now you know that you have to come back through the atmosphere, and the system does a good job, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. We train for those problems, but there's certain things that you can't do to help yourself if the fire burns through. So that's probably the biggest challenge. Sir, right behind the red sweatshirt, yeah.
Do you ever look for the ISS when you're on the ground here, and when you see it, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you don't know, you can type in your location into lots of different websites, and it'll tell you when you, at your present place, can see the space station. And it's really good in places that around big cities it's not so great because of what we call light pollution. But you guys would have some really nice opportunities to see it right over the horizon, 3, 4, 5 minutes long. And I very often will look up there and see, and especially in the last month I have, and thought, holy cow, I was just on that thing. How strange is it to be back here on the Earth looking up, and I can picture in my mind what Karen and Luca are doing. I'm looking at my watch and go, okay, it's like 10 o'clock at night up there. They're winding down their day. So it's really fun to think about what's happening on board that thing as it zips across as I stand on in my home back porch and watch it. Yeah, right here. Favorite part about being in space? I would have to say spacewalks. And very closely followed by just enjoying the time with my crewmates. It's very special to share a really cool thing with people that you like being around, and that was the case for me. I really enjoyed my crew. Yeah, right here.
What was your favorite food?
What was my favorite food? I liked, NASA makes a really good seafood gumbo, and that was absolutely my favorite dish to eat. Way in the back in the gray sweatshirt.
Were you ever able to contact your family when you were up there?
So we can stay in really good touch. Once a week we have a video conference with our family in our house, and they're at home. We're in space. We have normal email. Although at the beginning, while I was there, we would hit the send button on email, and it would just sit. And once a day or twice a day, Mission Control would take the emails that we send and then send them, and they'd give us a batch. But in the last half of my stay, it was like regular email. You hit send, and it really goes to the person. We can call people. They're on the computer. There's an application that looks like a telephone, and we can dial any telephone number in the world, really. But we cannot receive telephone calls on board the space station. So that we have plenty of way to keep in touch with our family. With the gray sweatshirt, this guy in the back, really loud.
What TV show did you watch?
What TV show did I watch? We can't watch them live, but the ground will record whatever we want and send them up. And I like sports a whole lot, so ESPN Sports Center was what I watched pretty much every day. Red shirt, yeah. Am I ever going to go back to space? I would go in a heartbeat if and when they ask. In reality, it'll be 4 or 5 years down the road because there's kind of a circular line, and the people that have landed before me, they've been supporting other missions, and they'll be signed next, and it'll be my turn to support those guys as they go on to space. Yeah.
Do you see any landmarks from space?
Oh, good question. So what can we see on Earth from space? The smallest thing I ever saw I think, was a ship in the ocean, and I could see the wake. I don't think I could see the ship, but I could just tell where the end of the wake was, so obviously the ship was there. But that was the smallest thing I could see. You can certainly see cities. To find my hometown in York, sorry, I never looked for Fort Kent, but to find my hometown in York, I would find Cape Cod, because that's a very distinct thing to see, and then count the number of river inlets up that I knew how many it was to where the York River was. To find Fort Kent, you'd probably have to go down one of the rivers, and I'd have to study the geography a little bit, but travel around the river, and you can very easily find bodies of water from space, particularly when the sun is at certain angles, and it jumps right out, the river jumps right out at you from the land. And so you'd probably arc your way around the river, and then you guys would know instantly where Fort Kent was on those rivers. How is the internet reception on space? Well, believe it or not, we don't have, we can't access the internet directly while we're up there. We have a Wi-Fi network, but it's just for the local computers on board the space station. And if we want to go to the internet, if certain satellite coverage is in place, we can go onto the internet through a computer that's sitting in mission control, and then it goes out that way. So it's really slow and not really reliable. So I didn't do the regular internet very often. It wasn't worth the time. Let's see here. Yeah, sure. Did I see any aliens? Nope. Nope. Just Luca. Yeah.
How did you exercise in space?
He asked, how do we exercise in space? Well, in the video you saw a little bit, we have a treadmill, which the floor of it is on the wall, so you're looking at the ceiling when you run, a bicycle, and a big weight machine. And so those are the three things we used. You're right here. How many times does the space station go around the Earth? So it takes us 90 minutes to go around the Earth. So 45 minutes we're in the day, and 45 minutes we're in the night. And then so that means that in a one-day period, 24-hour day, we go around the planet 16 times. And it just keeps on doing that over and over since the beginning of the space station. And I don't know how many times it's been now, but a lot. But 16 times a day. Way in the back. Yeah. Oh, good question. How do we shower? We don't. No showers. But I will say you don't get very dirty. There's no dirt on the space station, so it's really just your sweat and your body oils. And you take here's how you do it. You take a bag of water and you kind of squirt it on your head, and you squirt it on whatever body part you want, and the water just stays right on you. And I would take a bar of soap and then kind of move it around the water, and then just wipe off with a washcloth, and there you go. You stay pretty clean. Yeah.
How much money did you make going to space?
How much money did I make going to space? I am an active duty Navy guy, and so my paycheck comes from the Navy, and NASA actually pays the Navy for our salaries. And so I got my normal Navy salary, and whenever we go on a business trip in the U.S. government employees, we get our hotel paid for, we get meals paid for, rental car paid for, but I didn't have a rental car. My meals were already taken care of, and my hotel was taken care of. But we also get this thing called incidental pay, which is $3.50. So I got a check for $512 when I got back from space as for my incidental expenses while I was on space. So that, not anything extra, just normal paycheck. Yes, ma'am, on the back wall.
How did you all adapt to the lack of sunlight?
How do we adapt to lack of sunlight? Well, we can still see the sun if we look out the window, but it doesn't really, you don't get the vitamin D, you don't get the benefits from that sunlight that you do if you just go outside here. So we would have to take a lot of vitamin D supplements, and I think that's what the line of your question is, but just generally looking out the window, we would enjoy the sunrises and sunset, but that's just for our own peace of mind, not for the health. Young man right there. I didn't hear you? What would we do for fun? All the normal stuff that you do here, watch a movie, read a book, talk to your crewmates. That was I like doing that, just hanging out with joking around with my crewmates. Looking out the windows, an obvious thing. Playing practical jokes, all the kind of normal stuff you do here. In the green sweatshirt. What happens to your what? Oh, what happens if your nose itches on a spacewalk? It continues to itch. If you really, if any of you have gone scuba diving before, you know that when you change pressure, you have to hold your nose and kind of clear your ears. Well, in order to do that in a spacesuit, we have a little, it's a styrofoam block that you can smush your nose up against to help clear your ears as the pressure change. So if your nose really itches, you can lean over and rub it on that styrofoam block. But very often, you'll see people bonk go to scratch their nose and they don't make it past the visor. Yeah.
Does time feel the same in space?
She's asking, does time feel the same in space? And it really does. The question of what time zone do we live on is one, because there's Houston, there's Moscow, there's Japan, and all those control centers we have to deal with. So we pick Greenwich Mean Time, which is time in London, and that's when our day is based off. We wake up at 6 in the morning and go to bed around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and by the end of the time I was always ready for bed, and at 6 o'clock I was ready to wake up. So it felt like a normal kind of work day. Yeah?
What happens if you sneeze on a spacewalk?
What happens if you sneeze on a spacewalk? That's actually a good question. What you need to do is duck your nose below the level of where the helmet ring goes. You have to duck your nose below that level so the schmutz goes underneath the suit. If you have your head up, it splatters your view and it's not good. Yes, sir.
Movie Gravity, any good? Is Hollywood or international?
He's asking about the movie Gravity. I haven't seen it yet. I'm realizing that I failed miserably by not seeing the movie Gravity before I started this week, because I've gotten a lot of questions about it. But from what I understand, it's fantastic cinematography, really, really cool to see it. You can nitpick the technical details if you want to, but I think that's probably the case with a lot of science fiction type movies. But it does do an accurate depiction of what the space station looks like and what the Soyuz looks like and that sort of thing. With the hat right here.
Was there a bigger reason for you becoming an astronaut, or was it just the paperwork?
Was there a bigger reason for me becoming an astronaut? I think I met this guy, Bill Shepard. He kind of excited me about it, and I thought it would be really cool. But I also knew that it was a long shot to get picked, but I didn't feel there was any risk in that because I was enjoying my time in the Navy, and there was no downside to applying, because if I didn't get selected, I would continue to do what I was doing and enjoying that as well. So that was, yes ma'am, in the back.
What high school class or experience or skill did you feel helped you the most?
What high school class or experience and skill did I feel helped me the most? And that's a good question, because there's multiple parts to it. Math came easy for me, and I enjoyed doing math. And I had a really good math teacher named Mr. Hawks, and that one class was really motivational for me and motivated me to continue doing math, and that's why that was what I continued to study in college, was a math major. But I also think that the teamwork aspect that was developed in the sports fields from a little guy all the way through high school has what really helped me a lot in other aspects of my professional life, just combining the teamwork with the high school academic experience that was fostered throughout the rest of my education was probably the whole answer. If you what? So we're talking about bodily functions and what happens if you're sick in your spacesuit, and it would be messy, but it's not something that we want to do. Yeah. I can't hear you, sorry. If we go to the moon, can you bring home a moon rock? If we go back to the moon, we will definitely bring back moon rocks. They won't be personal mementos for the astronauts, but there'll be scientific reasons to take those moon rocks and study those rocks and what's the composition of them. Yes? Real loud, I'm sorry.
Were there any animals in space while you were there?
Ah, yeah. Were there any animals while we were there? Just before I arrived, there was a fish experiment, a Japanese fish experiment. They had a little aquarium, and they would poor fish, they would euthanize them at different stages of their lives, and it was to study the bone health of those fish and relate that to humans. And there will be some mice that fly up next year, but I was unfortunately in between the animals with the red shirt right there. I'm sorry.
If you could visit a planet in the solar system, which one would it be?
If we could visit a planet, which one it would be? It'd be Mars, hands down. That's the next closest planet that we can realistically get to, and it won't be while I'm an astronaut. It'll be maybe your guys' generation, and maybe even beyond that. But I sincerely think that's the direction that our manned spaceflight program should be, is to go to Mars and set up a small group of people that can sustain a presence of life on that planet. Yeah.
What would happen if you farted in your spacesuit?
So, what happens if he's asking, all right, I'll say it out loud. What happens if you fart in your spacesuit? And it just goes, you have to deal with it yourself, I guess is the best answer. Yeah. Orion? I still can't hear you.
You better the launch vehicle.
Yeah. So we're making, the space shuttle's retired, and we're making a new launch vehicle called the Orion space capsule. And that will have a test flight without people next year, 2014, and we're hoping for people in 2015-16. And that will be when we have a U.S. rocket back on, back launching from the Kennedy Space Center. I think we have 2 more questions right here.
What was the purpose of going up there?
What was the purpose of going up there? Really good question. So the space station is a national laboratory, and its primary role is for science and experiments and to push the frontier of knowledge not only in space, but how can things that we learn in space apply to our life here on Earth. So that's the #1 reason why we go. The secondary reason is to test out all the equipment that we would need for a long duration exploration mission to the moon or Mars, such as gross as you guys thought it is, the urine reprocessor. If you go to some other planet, you got to make use of every bit of water that you can get your hands on, and that type of technology that we're using and practicing and refining on the space station is what we need to have to get us to Mars. One more question right here.
What was it like to run a 5K in space?
What was it like to run a 5K in space? The town of York has a road race called the 4 on the 4th of July, and I ran on the treadmill at the exact same time as they were running in York. And don't tell the people in York, but I cheated. I added some length to my bungee cord, so I was really light and I could go really fast, and I beat all their runners. So I think that's all the time we have. Thanks so much for sharing your day with me. Yep. Thank you. Oh, I do have one thing to present to the school. This is a photo montage of our crew. A couple other pictures that you guys would recognize from the video, and our crew patch that flew with us on the mission. And it's my honor to present this to the Fort Kent High School. wow.
Very much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. Hey, how are you?